This is the photo that got me hired at the New York Post. This was the day after 9/11. My boss was like, "This is the one that stood out." So this was just kind of a defining moment in my career to have my boss single this picture out. It's just sort of a snapshot for me. I didn't really, I just knew I had to document it. It's just something like that every photographer has, is just this drive to document. So that was a really big moment for me to have someone tell me that they really appreciated that shot. And that's kind of what started my career.
Welcome back to New York's Business Podcast. My name is Jacob Restituto. I'm the host and owner of Restituto Media, a full service photo and video company based here on Long Island. Today I'm with Lizzy Snaps Sullivan. So thank you so much, Lizzy, for taking the time to have this conversation to share your story here on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. So I'd love to hear more about your story. You have a very unique story, but you've also done a lot of things in the industry, in the photography industry,
Hmm.
being featured on the Travel Channel, in Glamour magazine, and many other or Glamour online
Hmm.
with articles and stuff. And your articles and your photos have run the gamut of a bunch of different places that they've been. So I'd love to hear your story, and if you could share that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I guess I really started my career at the New York Post, kind of right after college. Uh, Before that, I had like three or four internships. Mariel and Mark was one of my favorite photographers. The artist Chuck Close, and then the 20 by 24 Polaroid studio. So right after college, I went to SUNY Purchase. I majored in fine art photography, and I kind of wanted to get my foot in the door somehow. So I internship for all these various places, all these artists and photographers. And my dream was to become a fine art photographer, which is what I majored in at SUNY Purchase. I got my BFA there. So I would go to all these galleries with my embossed fancy leather portfolio and present it to them and wait to hear back. And it was always a rejection. So I kind of like stopped dreaming that I was going to be that photographer with my art on the wall and my own show and all of that. And so I had to start making money because the internships was maybe $10 a day at that time. So I would spend that on a sandwich, didn't even cover like train fare. Um, so I, like anybody else out of college, thought I would be a bartender to make some, quick money. So I started training at Hogs and Heifers on Jane Street in the meatpacking district. And I also had an interview at the New York Post on the same week. Um, and Hogs and Heifers was so much fun, and I was on the bar spraying water at people and dancing and, just being silly and making, some money. So after the interview with Dave Boyle at the New York Post, he was the photo editor, um, I showed him my portfolio. One photo stood out. I actually have it here. And I basically got offered both jobs on the same day. After a week of training at Hogs and Heifers, Dave Boyle says, "When can you work?" And I remember coming back to my house, my parents' house in Park Slope, and their house cleaner, Joe, was there. And I said, "Joe, what do I do? Do I work at Hogs and Heifers or do I go to the New York Post?" He's like, "Well, you kind of went to college to become a photographer. Why don't you do that?" And I was like, "All right, I'm going to try this out." And that changed everything for me. It just gave me major access to everything going on in the city, like new restaurants. I was a photographer. I started in the studio, but everybody was my boss. So I would work for the features department, sports department, news department, which was the most stressful. Um, and I shot a lot of celebrities during that time. So I was in my 20s, with all this photo equipment, trying to go to these press junkets and had 15 minutes to shoot Chris Rock, who had a new movie coming out. Um, and most of that time is me just setting up my equipment, and then by the time you, like, actually pull the trigger, it's like you have to make 3 good photos with someone that's over it already and, doesn't wanna a lot of them don't wanna cooperate. Um, but it was really exciting, and there was a lot of adrenaline all the time, which is what I feed off of. I like to not just sit and be at a desk. I liked being out in the field, and I learned so much. I learned lighting. I learned how to, not be scared to cross police lines and get the photograph. I saw a lot of dead bodies in the news for news assignments, which I wasn't expecting, but kind of get used to it. And it basically exposed me to a lot of different things in a short amount of time, and it was really fun. and really exciting. And it was better than any education that I could have had in any institution because you're on the spot, you're under pressure, and you're just learning constantly. And not to mention that when I was in college, it was all film and it was no digital yet, like which dates me, but the New York Post was digital, and that was like a new language, which I was a little bit intimidated by. But I picked it up pretty quickly, and that's kind of where I got my start.
So it's interesting that you say that you got more education in your first job as a photographer than you did in school. I find that in a lot of these conversations, and also from my own personal experience, like I was mentioning before we got started, that I'm a college dropout and I learned more hands on experience about music
Mhm.
than I ever did in any of the classes that I took. So it's a really interesting debate about schooling and not schooling.
Yeah.
So you get your first job with New York Post.
hmm
You're there for how long, and then where do you go from after that?
I want to say I started working at the New York Post in 2004 to about 2011. During that time, I did Fashion Week. Made a lot of contacts. And the Post started sending videographers out on the field to document. So if I had a fashion shoot with a model, it was like a whole team. It was just really fun. It was like random locations, random concepts, all these editorial shoots that we would do. And one of the videographers, his name was Francisco Ali Wallace, and he just was a burst of energy. He had so much creativity. We kept in touch over the years. He calls me up out of the blue. I had just moved to LA, not finding any work. I signed with Getty, but Getty Images.
Can you talk about that a lot, or for a second, because I see that a lot in the industry, particularly with celebrities or with sports and stuff. The Getty Images sign.
Oh yeah.
How does you say you sign with them? What does that work? How does that work?
So I was originally signed with Splash News. So like if you photograph a celebrity, you collect royalties from that image. So I remember shooting Fergie from Black Eyed Peas, and they would just cut checks. There was a certain percentage that photographers receive versus how much they keep. So it was so he knew people, higher up people, and that was the rate I was getting. So you know, that Post put me on a lot of celebrity shoots, and it would just kind of be amazing. You just sit back and collect money off of one picture, and it's nice because I was published worldwide with some of these images, which was exciting. Um, well, anyway, back to Francisco. He kind of had his own production company, but he was friends with a guy named Jim Morley, who was the executive producer at Travel Channel. And Francisco, I just moved to LA. I was just there for 2 years, signed with Getty, but it was more red carpet events, um, and I wasn't really excited about event photography. I was more of a portrait photographer, um, and honestly, the transmitting of them and the process that Getty had at that time was so confusing, and I, like, dreaded even being called for an assignment because it was so laborious and, like, terrible. Like, I just never even anyway, it was short-lived that I lived in LA, and, so anyway, out of the blue, I get a call from Francisco, and he said, "I want you to be a host, um, on a Travel Channel web series called You Get the Picture." And I said, "I don't have any hosting experience, I've never been on TV, I've never I've never had any experience in this department. I don't know if I'm the person." He said, "Well, I'm going to put you in touch with Jim Morley." And so I met with Jim in one of those fancy business bars near the Penn Station. Um, and he was like, "I love your voice because you don't sound like you don't have a typical host voice." And I've never liked my voice. And I was just like, wow, like this guy likes my voice. Like, that's really exciting. And he was big on setting a scene. He put me on the spot, and he was all about like using all of your senses at once. When you talk about where you are, you have to say, "Oh, it's what it smells like, what it looks like, what it feels like to be in this space." And that was really exciting for me because I've never even thought about those things. So as a host, you kind of have to like describe where you are, you know, and so I had to talk about the bar that we were in. Oh, I don't even remember what I said, but
It's funny that you mentioned that because when you walked in here, you were talking about how it looked, but then you were like, Wow, I love the smell of the wood
Yes.
that's coming. It just
It's
I guess
ingrained in my memory to just talk about where I am now.
Mhm.
No, that's so funny
That is
because
funny.
this wood smell is really nice. It just picks,
Mhm.
reminds you of certain things from your childhood or whatever.
Mm.
Um, so I met with Jim and he decided to put me on and we called it You Get the Picture with Lizzy Snaps, which I thought was hilarious because for once my name was like, I felt like I was famous for 15 minutes, the everybody should have their 15 minutes of fame and I felt like I had found it. So they put me on mainly in the city. I had to go to Grand Central. I had to talk about New York City landscapes. I had to talk about night photography. And the best part about the show is that it's kind of like guerrilla shooting. Like there was not really necessarily like a script or an agenda. I kind of just had to find people, strangers, come up to them, which I love doing anyway, and I would break down all the settings that my camera, like whatever I had on my, I never shoot automatic. It's all you don't learn that way. So manual settings, and it would break down the aperture, the shutter speed, the ISO, so people could actually learn and not just, oh yeah, this is another person on a photo, show. They're actually explaining what they're doing. So I would do fun things like have an assistant run in Grand Central, shadowing, a really fast walking person on their way to work, and I would have them with a strobe, and then I would slow the shutter speed, and we just like experiment with lighting and kind of explain what that process was, which was really fun for me because I never had a chance to talk about what I did. Um, so that was just a great experience. They sent me to the Bahamas. They put me on on this boat. The only wetsuit available was an extra small, like child's wetsuit. So like half of the time was me trying to get my leg into this wetsuit, and they're trying to pull this thing, and then I finally get this thing on, and they're like, "Oh, and this episode is going to be of you swimming with sharks," and I was like, "Oh, really?" I was like, "That's really funny because I didn't know that, and now I'm like horrified." Um, so I didn't really have a choice, and I'd never swam with sharks, but I was excited to try it. The woman that was kind of our tour guide put all these weights on herself so she could really submerge herself and go down to the bottom with the sharks. And I opted out of that because
Mhm.
I wanted to stay very close to the top of the water. I was terrified and shivering. It was really a challenging experience, but really fun at the same time. And I was in the Bahamas. It was really
So it sounds like from our conversation so far, you mentioned a lot of names, and it sounds like there's a lot of relationships, and a lot of the opportunities you've had have come through relationships. Can you speak on that? Can you speak on the importance of relationships in business?
absolutely. I think the most important part of running a business is networking and, um, just sharing your experiences with other people, not necessarily in your field, but, for me, being a woman in a business, in my own business, I gravitate more towards women, running their own businesses and feeding off of each other, being inspired by each other. Especially because when I first started out, it felt like a predominantly male field to be working in. I remember shooting Fashion Week in Bryant Park, um, and there's like three locations you can shoot in. It's backstage, front row where all the celebrities sit, and then the pit. It was very rare that there was other females, everybody had their taped out spot. I remember Anthony Causey, rest in peace, from the Post would always tape out. He was always the first to tape out the New York Post Square, so nobody could sit there. Um, but it was just like, I don't know, 50 to 75 photographers all in this clump together. And it was really hard being a female and trying to like be taken seriously. Oh, you're not going to be sitting here. You're in the way, like plus I was really young and it was a scary situation to be in because you have a videographer. I remember the models walking towards the videographers would pan with their camera and I'd be huddled, hunched down under their tripod. And if you knocked into the leg of the tripod, you basically fucked their whole shot up. So it was really like I just remember like timing their lens and then popping back up and then it was like this timing thing, right? You're squashed, like there's you can't even, and you're just forced to smell all these smells from people. It was just a very odd experience, but you kind of had to hold your ground as a woman and not be kicked out of a good spot. So, as at the same time, as hard as it was, like being the only female, it made me a little bit stronger to like, stand up to some of the men that didn't take me seriously.
I think that it sounds like resilience is the word. The pushing through and in uncomfortable or frustrating or when people are pushing you down kind of situation. And I've found that in a lot of these conversations in my own experience that that is one of the true marks of a true entrepreneur, true business owner is that resilience. That hey, I don't really care that I have to be, or I do care, but I'm going to push through the fact that I have to be in these uncomfortable, frustrating situations. I don't necessarily want to be,
Hmm.
but it's in the direction I want to go. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and you just kind of sometimes you don't even have this conversation in your head. It's just something you do, and I found that that's a really interesting marker for somebody that has their own business or is
Hmm.
an entrepreneur. As somebody that's not, they kind of shy away from these situations where it's like, I don't need to be uncomfortable. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned networking as being super important in any industry.
Hmm.
What are you doing now? So once you were with the travel channel, let's actually backtrack a little. You were with the travel channel or travel channel, right?
Hmm.
And went where? And now you do predominantly portrait photography, correct?
Yeah.
So how did you pivot to that? And then like, what are you doing now to network?
After so when I should talk about the post again because I was hired as a staff photographer at the post, but I realized quite quickly that I preferred to be freelance because I didn't like other people owning my pictures. It felt wrong to me. And that's what kind of pushed me to get a DBA. And um, so once I did that, I was in Brooklyn at the time, and I knew Google was, everyone uses Google. So I was trying to think of a business name. I wanted to shoot family portraits. I specialize in portraits. So I kind of just landed on Brooklyn family portrait because those are the three words that people would look up to have a Brooklyn family portrait.
Pretty clever, actually.
And I kind of went from there. It just kind of evolved. Now I'm in Huntington and it's Huntington Family Portrait. So I kind of have both of these businesses and I commute back and forth. But, once I realized how much I didn't want people to own my pictures, that kind of let me see how can I, what's the next step for me here? So that's when I started my own business. I have a photo studio in Park Slope. I'm there almost every weekend. I have a photo studio in Huntington, which is great for the slow season because now I can control the light, I can control the temperature, and I can still make a living when it's freezing out, which is really wonderful.
I would assume that a majority of your business is cyclical or seasonal.
Hmm.
I'm assuming holiday photos.
Hmm.
What are you actively like? How do you stay busy during the slow seasons, or do you even not even have slow seasons because there are people coming to you all the time?
Well, yeah. So the studio has saved me during the slow season. I'll do headshots. People need that all year round. I don't really do that many holiday shoots. It's kind of not my favorite. But I do a lot of like newborn shoots, which
So actually, yeah, let me backtrack and how about you tell me a little bit more about the style of photography that you do, and we'll take it from there.
so I specialize in portrait photography that includes headshots and anything portrait related, newborn photography, cake smashes, which have become such a thing, which didn't exist a while ago.
So what people hire you for the first birthday, and
Yes,
you
which is
take
like a
photos
whole production in itself. It's like they get a cake just for the purpose of the.
coming to your studio and taking photos.
Yeah, and there's a theme. So, oh, let's pick a theme. Oh, flowers, spring. So then I design my whole studio. I get flowers. Well, this is like even before because now AI has kind of made it so that I can superimpose everything, which is wonderful. I don't have to buy everything now. Um, so yeah, um, it's kind of fun to arrange everything. Then they dress the 1-year old up, however they decide to, and then they present this cake, which most of the time the baby's never seen a cake, doesn't want anything to do with it. The parents are getting frustrated because there's no engagement with this big fancy cake and they spent all this money. So then I'll have the parents kind of take some of the frosting and put it on, try to like get them to taste it and then, eventually the kid is like tearing that fucking cake to shreds. which is good for the photos, but it takes a very long time to get the kid to want to touch this very funny cake. Like
Yeah.
it's just funny.
You mentioned AI, and I just recently had another photographer on here. She's a bit more of a like an elegance wedding photographer.
Hmm.
Totally, I mean, same industry, totally different field
Hmm.
within the or scope of work in the industry. She had a unique, very unique. We talked about AI in the photography industry, and I gave an example of a story. I had filmed a wedding for a friend, and the photographer was editing his photos with AI as he was taking them. And I
Hmm.
was like, I've never seen this before. Of course, I'm familiar with AI. I use it. I use ChatGPT probably 15 times a day.
I
Use
love
it all the
ChatGPT.
time. In fact, the message you probably received to come on this interview was probably written by
It's
ChatGPT.
awesome. Thank God.
But
Thank God for
um,
them.
so he was showing it to me, and he was taking these photos, and he said it took an enormous amount of startup work where he had been a photographer say 15, 20 years.
Hmm.
He had fed it 10,000 photos and showed it all these different photos, and it would then edit things for him, and then he'd say, no, I don't like this. I do. You're training just like you're training your YouTube algorithm or something like that. You're training the algorithm, the AI, the artificial intelligence, to edit like you. And every once in a while it messes up, but like for the most part, after 1,000 photos, it knows, okay, this is how in this dark situation he'll edit this,
Yes.
how in this light situation
A
he'll edit
hundred
this.
percent. You're basically training your computer to understand your editing
And your decision
technique.
making. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was so against AI when I think everyone kind of is like apprehensive. It's going to take over the world. It's going to take over people's jobs, which it's already doing. Um, so I was like anti AI, just like I was anti digital, but like you kind of have to surrender to the times and just kind of go with it and learn everything kind of all over again. So my friend was the one that taught me AI in Photoshop, and I was just like, "What is this? What is this AI stuff?" But now I use it every time I edit. It cuts editing time in half, which means I get to spend more time with my kids, um, which is all what everybody wants to do. But so there's this, I don't know if you're familiar with Photoshop, but it's just generate.
Hmm.
I mean, I would stamp for hours, stamp hair like flyaways out of people's hair or the acne on people's faces or I shoot a lot of babies. There's like a lot of, you know, discoloration, all these things, bumps. And now I have this wonderful AI tool that like is like my best friend now because I don't have to stamp. I just highlight it and it does the work for me, which is brilliant. And I'm so grateful for it.
I was just talking to a buddy, and he was saying how he sometimes, and I related to this. He's like, I feel a little guilty because I don't. He's like, I grew up with a dad that would work 12 hours a day. He was constantly working.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily feel like I have to because I'm like, I don't even know what I would do.
Hmm.
And I was like, it's funny you say that because as a type A go getter, I totally relate. And there are times where I'm like, I don't really. There's always something you could be doing, but
Hmm.
I don't really. There's nothing of major importance at the moment.
Right.
So but I'm like, what do I do? In this conversation, we like part of the reason I think we're at a different state is because what took 7 hours 20 years ago, you can now do in 15 minutes.
Yes.
So there's all this extra time that you have now that
Yeah.
it's like, okay, really can get a lot of my work done in 4 hours. Now, does that mean I'm only working 4 hours? Depends on the day, right?
Hmm.
But it's very different than 20 years ago that the portrait photographer that had to stamp out every
Oh my God.
single. But on the flip, 20 years before that, it
Burning and
took it
dodging.
yeah, it took even longer, so it progressively gets faster. And my whole theory with the AI thing about with jobs is I think that you have two choices. You either embrace it or you don't. And if
Yeah.
you don't, you have to recognize the fact that you will probably get surpassed
Yes.
in the industry, or you really niche down
Hmm.
on what will become the old school.
Yeah.
Just like a film photographer. People are hiring film photographers for their wedding. You just niche into that.
Hmm.
But I find it really interesting because I find it. I think I'm a part-time farmer. So
Really? That's
It's
awesome.
funny. I was thinking about before this interview how to phrase that because it comes up in almost every conversation that I have, usually prior to filming,
Hmm.
when I give the bottle of wine. Uh, but yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was interested in growing my own stuff, my vegetables and all these things, and and people started reaching out. I was growing so much where people were like, "Hey, are you selling this?" And I was like, No, but I
I'm
can
definitely
be.
buying some of your vegetables.
Sure.
It's amazing.
So I was, but I was so intimidated because it was so far from my industry. And
Mhm.
as an entrepreneur, I was the kid selling energy drinks out of my locker. I've always been that kind of guy.
Uh-huh.
But I was like, I don't have no. What do I charge for an eggplant? I have no idea.
Mhm.
So I, it was. I brought it up to my wife, who I was kind of nervous to hear her opinion because she's real. She'll tell me that's a terrible idea. She's like, it's a great idea.
You need that.
She was like, this is a great idea. You should do it. I was like, really? I totally thought you were going to think this is crazy.
Wow.
So a couple of years ago, I started selling it, and I tell all of this because it's the backstory to what I'm about to say. Is I think a lot about the agricultural revolution we all learned about in like fourth grade,
Mhm.
where it used to just be all 100 hands on the farm, and they also used to have their tills or their hoes, and they'd be raking away. And then some guys like, hey, I have this machine, and what you did in 12 hours, I can do in about 13 minutes.
Right.
And it put a lot of people out of work,
Mhm.
but it gave the opportunity to produce a lot more. And it's this
Double-edged
double-edged
sword.
sword for everything. But then the industrial revolution, all these things changes the world.
Mhm.
It puts people out of work, but then new jobs are developed. Somebody
Yeah.
needs to fix the machine that was just
Everything will
broken.
always evolve after the
Well,
dust
that's what I think
settles.
it is. I think it's really just an evolution because yes, you don't need 100 farmhands anymore. You just need one guy to drive the tractor.
Mhm.
But you need somebody to build the tractor and build the parts of the tractor and the nuts and bolts for the thing. And you need somebody to
Maintain
fix
it.
it. And you need somebody to make the oil now for the tractor. So
Mhm.
I think that people get so short-sighted on the fact of, well, I don't have I'm letting go of 100 farmhands. But those people will find. I mean, as a society, we've progressively reproduced more and more.
Right.
There's always more
Probably
people in
too
this world.
much.
Yeah, well, that's
It's
a
like
different conversation.
right.
But as a society, progressed more and more, and we still have enough jobs,
Mhm.
more or less. If you want to get into the politics of the side, but yeah, I think you're right. It just after the dust settles after a year or two, new opportunities present themselves.
Yes, you just have to regroup and renegotiate.
So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing today, marketing wise, and how do you get yourself out there, or is it all word of mouth?
Most of my clients are based in Brooklyn, just because I work there for so much longer, and that's all word of mouth. The Google search with my business name
How did
is.
that go? Did that the SEO work by doing Brooklyn Family Photographer or Huntington Family
I
Photographer?
get a lot of work from Google. I have Google reviews. I have like 165 out of 5-star reviews. Google has just been like amazing.
All organic, non-paid.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just I got really lucky with my name.
It's no different than the podcast in the sense of like I called it New York Business Podcast, and people were like,
Right.
"Oh wow, this is great." Yeah, it just holds
Exactly.
a weight. And Brooklyn Family Photographer
You
is
just
a
have to be
great.
direct,
It's
dial
great.
direct
Yeah,
and just say what you
it's brilliant.
literally are doing. And
I think I love that. I think that's brilliant.
yeah, so it's been great. Like the Brooklyn, but so now I'm trying to move a lot more of my work to Huntington. I'm in a divorce. I have 2 kids, so now it's alternating weekends. So now I have to kind of pile all my shoots in one weekend so that they don't have to be dragged to Brooklyn. And so that's a whole nother situation that I have to navigate through. But
Hmm.
I was, investing a very small amount in social media ads, but that's just not who I am. I haven't really been doing that much of that. It's really word of mouth for my business, and it's been working pretty well. I would say that I'm doing more headshots in Long Island more than anything else.
Business related headshots.
Like lawyers' firms and um, just anybody. I mean, most people have a headshot from when they were in their 20s, and so now they're in their 40s, and everything has to get updated. So I take a lot of headshots.
Is all of it studio work, or do you do a lot of it outside of the studio?
Most of the headshots are studio. Um, I rarely get people who want outdoor headshots, just more typical for the studio.
So one thing I like asking the guests is a little bit more practical. Of you mentioned Photoshop and the AI generate. Are there any other services or tools or anything in your industry or in your business as a business owner that you use, for example, like something specific in QuickBooks or anything like that, that you found has really streamlined your process or helped grow your business?
Not at all. I mean, I I don't use quick. I don't. I've never even used that. I'm pretty simple. I'm like a one-man show. Um, I do all. If I have downtime, I update my website. Um, I'll make my own little ads on Photoshop. I'll do like a sale of headshot sale. And I'll have to like put that whole flyer together. And Facebook has been really helpful.
In what sense?
So I'm like, I have so many groups that I'm a part of, mainly moms groups, being a fellow mom. And, it's just been a valuable platform for me to advertise on. Oh, I need a, everyone's always looking for something on these groups, like, or selling something or offering something for free. I've gotten a ton of free furniture from these groups. It's like amazing. These moms Facebook groups are like kind of running the world in their own little way. Um, so, I see a lot of comments, I need a newborn photographer, I need a new headshot. And I kind of just immediately, put my website. Um, and that's been really helpful for me to find work as well.
So I think one of the most valuable training or learning experiences that we can have from other entrepreneurs is typically from their failures. And it's funny, I was just talking to somebody else about this, and we were saying how it's funny when you give advice to somebody and then you see them succeed significantly faster than you did. And part of you is like, how did that happen? And then the person was like, yeah, but it's because you gave them all the things you messed up on, and
Hmm.
now they don't have to mess up. So they do succeed faster than you because you had to learn all those things on your own. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does.
But is there anything in particular for the audience listening that you tried and didn't necessarily work for you, or necessarily quote unquote a failure that you ended up learning from and moving towards in your business?
Yeah, sure. I think I tried so many different things at the Post. I kind of touched on weddings, and I kind of tried to do that whole wedding photography because you make a lot of money in a short amount of time. But what I learned very quickly is that I couldn't sit at my computer for weeks on end editing the same two people. And I knew every wrinkle on their face. I knew every blemish, and I just couldn't. I'm just not a person that can be confined to a chair and a desk. And so that kind of killed it for me pretty fast when I realized that I couldn't edit the same people for months at a time. I went crazy. So I quickly, I loved shooting weddings and I love all of the moments that I captured. It was just kind of the editing that kind of killed it for me. I couldn't do it. So that was a huge fail. Not a huge fail. I still shoot weddings, but if I know the people personally, I don't just shoot strangers. Weddings, I like have to love the person to shoot their wedding at this point. Like, so yeah, I guess weddings is my fail.
So on the flip, though, is there anything in particular that a success story that maybe propelled your career or really stands out in your memory?
Oh, sure. It was for the New York Post. And Dave Boyle, the photo editor, came to the back room. The Post was kind of an interesting layout. It was the news desk was in the front, mostly male, uh, mostly men. Sports desk, mostly men. Features, mostly women. Um, and then you had the imaging department, which kind of mixed. And that's where the studio was, you know, where I worked. But Dave Boyle came running to the back room and said, Sullivan, there was a plane crash on the Hudson River. Get there now. And it was the one day that I forgot my 70 to 200 millimeter lens. So I go to the photo equipment closet, and there's only one broken one because it won't mount to the body of my camera. So I would have to hold it and it was in January. I want to say January 15th. It was one of the coldest days. I didn't have gloves. I didn't anticipate being outside for hours. So I get into a cab, I go to the Hudson, and I get the photo of everybody on the wing, but the current was pulling this plane very fast down the river. So you kind of had to just be freezing, running in the snow, with all this stuff. Um, so anyway, people were starting to come off of the plane. They were kind of transporting them from boats onto the West Side Highway. Um, Photographers everywhere, interviewing witnesses, people on board, and there was this one woman coming out on a gurney, a sheet over her, and all of us were kind of together. Oh, there's another one. Let's get her. Um, so at the last minute, I jumped onto the other side of the pathway, and she took the sheet and she kind of covered her face for privacy. So nobody on that side got the picture, and it turned out to be the stewardess on the plane. And I was the only person to get the picture of the stewardess on board that flight. And it was like a huge deal. It was like one of my proudest moments to have been the only photographer to just hop over at the last second. And, my boss was thrilled. The post had the only picture of that. It sold worldwide.
Wow.
And that was like one of my proudest moments because I just, but instinctually, you know, relocated, not relocated, but
Just to comment on that, it's interesting because it goes back to our conversation of resilience,
mhm,
and it starts with, "Oh, it's freezing cold out," and yeah, you could like you're employed at that point, so you were. This is at like post freelance. This is when you were on staff.
unfortunately,
Yeah,
yeah.
but point being, yeah, well, that would have been a
All
great
the
shot.
royalties went to them.
But that being said, though, yeah, everybody can make excuses for their boss, being like, "Oh, I'm gonna be too far away. All the cameras, there's no, I forgot my
I don't
lens or
have a
what,
lens.
and it kind of just pushes past that it speaks on the resilience that I think that is key in every entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, where you said, okay, it's a broken lens, I'm gonna make it work.
Mhm.
And you did, and then even in the freezing cold, you said no gloves, and in the middle of January on the water.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was probably
Getting cold
brutal.
just
Yeah.
thinking about it all over again.
So, but it's just pushing through, and I think that resilience creates the opportunity.
Right.
So you briefly talked about earlier, and this kind of segues into it, the when you were with the post and hopping line, the police barriers and stuff. Do you have any interesting stories about that? Just like getting into precarious situations because.
Oh my god. Where do I begin? Oh gosh. I remember, I mean, I was just fearless, I had no problem going up to anybody, sneaking. I was undercover a lot in my job. I was a young female. I looked a lot younger at the time. Um, I would disguise myself as just to get into the building, get access. I remember Prince Harry was visiting, and we had access. We had to follow him for the day. He had all these locations he was going to stop by, and he was playing basketball with kids at a school. So I got some pictures of him playing, but everybody was getting the same generic picture of Prince Harry. Then the next stop was the VA building or the VA hospital in Manhattan. So we could stay at the lobby, but we couldn't go to any of the other floors. So I was like, boring. Um, how do I get Prince Harry? So, I put my all my photo equipment in my car because I couldn't walk around the hospital with all this equipment. And I just had a point and shoot. I think I put like, I just tried to fit in as like a visitor. I think I had like a sticker I found on the ground.
No.
I went up on the elevator. I get up to all of the nurses are like, Prince Harry's here, Prince. I was like, okay, so here, this is the floor he's on. This is where he's going to be. So everyone's like, Prince Harry's coming, like, yay. So he comes down the hallway with all of his security. And I'm like, I have my little point and shoot, whatever. It's not going to be the best photo, but it's going to be like
A photo that
a
people
more
like.
exclusive photo, right? So he poses with the nurses, blah, blah, blah. Then he gets on this like private elevator with all of his security. I jump on the elevator with my point and shoot. And the picture, I wish I had brought it today, but the picture is Prince Harry and all of his security laughing their asses off because they don't know who the fuck I am. And I have this little dumb point and shoot camera. I'm like, Prince Harry over here, Prince Harry over here. Like I'm the paparazzi with like these great, like all this like fancy equipment. And I'm just standing there with like a backpack so I look like a kid, like taking this picture of Prince Harry. And it was like it was so funny. Like the picture is just hilarious. You can feel how uncomfortable and like weirded out people are knowing that I'm just the only girl and they don't know who the fuck I am. And so I got an exclusive with Prince Harry.
You brought your portfolio. Do you have any photos
Oh
you want to
yeah.
talk about?
So this is when Mad Men came out. So this is John Hamm and some of the cast, Christina Hendricks and Elizabeth Moss. Sharon Stone. This was a story in itself. This was at the what's that? Why am I blanking? That fancy store. What's that store in the city on like 57th Street? It's
Hold on
two.
one sec. Let's see if ChatGPT has it.
Oh God, thank you.
Bergdorf Goodman.
Yes, that is it.
There you
Thank
go. Look
you,
at that. There
ChatGPT.
it is.
So I had to photograph Sharon Osbourne at Bergdorf Goodman.
Hmm.
We had, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes. The smoke alarm went off, or all these like flashing lights were going off, triggering my lights. There was no way that I could take a photo. I had 5 minutes to take this portrait of her. She noticed all these tattoos and asked about my tattoos, and she was just so endearing and so lovely, um, and worked with me because she could tell I was really stressed that I was running out of time and I couldn't take a photo. I was like literally unable to take a picture of her. So this was done in 5 minutes. Um, I tried to make it a little different. Had her take her shoes off and put her in this little chair, and she was one of the nicest people I ever photographed. But it was just like another typical under pressure
Always.
moment. But then I got to photograph Iman and what was her name? Patricia Velasquez. They were lovely. Iman was very serious, Snooky pregnant. That was very typical New York Post assignment. Then I kind of went on my own and did portraits in my apartment of burlesque dancers. I did a whole burlesque series, which was awesome. I loved shooting them. Agnes Dane, this famous model in the city. Coney Island Freak Show. These people were amazing. I love
A
Coney
great
Island.
photo.
This was the Rockettes backstage. Um, That's before equipment had wheels and there was no elevator. I'd use the back door to carry up like a boat battery
What
of a
year would you say this was?
2009.
Is this posed or is this them just actually having?
No, this is very posed. Um, they just wanted a backstage shot of the Rockettes, and I kind of tried to just fill the frame as much as I could. Um, just kind of like the
Photos are
reflection.
wildly clear. I mean, I don't know if it can come through on camera, but
I don't know. Can you
man,
see it?
it's incredible how crisp these photos are.
Oh God, they were nice. They were just funny. And then I did a lot of fashion. This was in Miami. This is the, the freak show, but I convinced the Post to let me do a fashion shoot in Coney Island. So we incorporated the freak show into our fashion show. And oh God, some of the greats, Richard Avedon and what's that famous female photographer? Oh my God. Well, Diane Arbus, she wasn't a fashion photographer. She was just a very dark shooter. And I loved her kind of moody stuff. So I just tried to incorporate that. Selena Gomez was lovely. It's when she was a lot younger. And then I kind of got to do a lot of fashion shoots. This was a Bonnie and Clyde inspired fashion
Oh
shoot
wow.
in upstate New York. And I had to rent the car. I had guns that I had to rent. The FBI had me on file for renting real guns, like Tommy guns. And it was just fun. It was just a fun time. This is a whole nother story. James Brown at the Apollo.
Oh wow.
My boss said, "You're not going. You're not shooting this. Sorry, we have a photographer." I said, "I'm going to shoot James Brown." I got on the train, got off the train in Harlem, and everybody in their store was selling James Brown everything and blasting James Brown as you walk by these stores. You could hear all of his music. I get to the Apollo Theater. Um, and they said, "Okay, well, the press is on the balcony, like, you cannot go on the stage." And I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, okay." So it was winter time, and I had a big down jacket on. Shoved my camera under my armpit, and, I said, "No problem, but I'm on a deadline." They're like, "You're not on the list." I said, "I'm on a deadline, I really have to get in there. I need to go get this shot." They said, "Okay, well, you can go to the balcony." I said, "Okay, sure." So I go up, and all these people, I mean, the line was crazy to see James Brown. All these people are waiting for hours. And I get online, I kind of skip the line, and then I get up on stage, and I know that I have like 2 seconds. I don't know what my settings are yet. Um, and I take my camera out. There's this huge camera, huge flash, and I just start shooting. I get thrown off of the stage immediately, and all the photographers are, "Who the fuck is that? Who is that? Why is she on stage? Why can't?" And I just thought they're going to take my camera, but I put it back under my armpit in my coat, and then I left. But I got the picture that I. It's like it's such a rush, It's like it was so
Nah, an
fun.
adrenaline rush. Very interesting.
The
Yeah.
adrenaline. Oh, and this was the picture that I brought to show you because this is the photo that got me hired at the New York Post. This was the day after 9/11. Um, and my boss was like, "This is the one that stood out." This is before COVID. This is like just a mask to protect her from the smoke. This is where the World Trade Center was. So this was just kind of a defining moment in my career to have my boss single this picture out. It's just sort of a snapshot for me. I didn't really, I just knew I had to document it. It's just something like that every photographer has. Is just this drive to document. So that was a really big moment for me to have someone tell me that they really appreciated that shot, and that's kind of what started my career.
Those photos are remarkable,
Oh,
and
thanks.
you have an incredible talent. You mentioned a couple times where you're crossing lines and going undercover. I think that the idea, and not I don't know if you give yourself this name or if you separate yourself from it, but the idea of paparazzi, some
Mhm.
people have a bad taste for them. What's your perspective on that?
I had the opportunity to do that. They make tons of money. Um, but I don't want the picture that everybody gets. I just think it's very boring and generic and also invasive. Like I didn't want to intrude. People don't like the paparazzi. It's just not the title that I saw myself having. I was in situations where I kind of acted as a paparazzi, but not, I didn't have like the status of a paparazzi. I wasn't like making a profession out of,
Oh, interesting.
stalking people. I just didn't
Oh,
like that aspect of
yeah.
feeling like, it just wasn't interesting to me. That everyone's there together doing this thing that like just seems silly.
But wouldn't you say that hopping on the elevator with Harry or the James Brown pulling the camera is a little paparazzi esque, or
Yes, it definitely has that vibe, but it wasn't like I also am not like I hate to like generalize the paparazzi, but they're generally like typically men and blocking people so they can't walk or like getting too much in their space where it's like a threat, and an annoyance. The thing with Harry, Prince Harry was kind of funny and comical. It was like, I wasn't like, hey, I was just more, it was more of like an entertainment situation than anything else. Like, yeah, for sure, I was trying to get the shot, but I wasn't trying to like,
I guess it boils down to how you go about it more than anything else. But
yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna sit in my car with a long lens and like, I'm not gonna be like,
well, the last question that I have for you to wrap it up is where do you see yourself? What's the opportunity that you see in your field? Where do you see yourself going in the next future?
I guess I would I would really like to get more work in Long Island versus Brooklyn. Um, I love working with people. I love getting to know them. I love working with kids. And I think you know, my previous career was shooting celebrities and all these big people. It was a challenge, but it's shifted to more of a challenge of getting most people in general don't like to have their picture taken. So automatically you're kind of like one step behind. So I like the challenge of working, especially 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds are the most challenging people to photograph because there's tantrums. The parents are getting stressed that they spent money
I have a 2 year
trying
old. I can
to
relate.
get like, and the kids just don't want to cooperate. So then I use what Jim Morley said, like senses. I like, oh, what I get down on their level. I say, what's this wall saying? Oh my God, the wall's speaking. You got to come over here, and you just kind of learn how to engage. They say, the parents are so grateful at the end. Oh, I don't know how you have so much patience. And that's kind of helped me be a better parent also because it's kind of forced me to be the most patient person during these sessions to like, just kind of accept that a 2-year-old isn't going to smile when you want them to, So I think with what I do in my field, it's really taught me to be a better parent.
I love that.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was how when I was 2 months old, I was adopted from Chile, and I think that has played such a big role in what I do now with family portraits because when I grew up, my dad Neil would take pictures of vacations, just typical photo album pictures. But being adopted and, having like sort of like this, traumatic thing happen where you're given away, for me, it was so important to see what my childhood was just based on these quick moments that my dad snapped, like um it was just very comforting to see that this bond that I had and that I was safe and I had this new life and two people that really loved me so much. And I was so grateful to have photo albums to look back on. And
Well,
so anyway, so being adopted, and having these photos, it just makes my job as a portrait photographer so much more rewarding because I'm giving these families these wonderful moments that are, childhood is the most fleeting stage in your whole life. And I just feel so like grateful that I'm given the opportunity and people trust me to give them photos of these quick moments that I have in 30-minute sessions or 15-minute sessions. And it just I love that part of my job, and I get to see all these kids grow. I have some of my clients now, they're 11 years old, their kids are 11, and I've photographed them every year since they were born, every consecutive year, and I love that part of my job. I feel like really truly blessed to be able to work with families and these children and, you know, watch them grow up on in front of my lens.
That's beautiful, and seeing the connection between your story and now what you're able to do and provide for other families is a really beautiful connection.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to hear your story. So thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you so much for this wonderful
Yeah, it's
opportunity.
been a pleasure. But if you are a business owner, and first of all, thank you so much to the guests or to the audience for watching. And if you're a business owner or know any business owners that you think would be a great fit for this podcast, reach out. And Lizzie Snap Sullivan, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time.
you so much, Jacob.
It's
I
been a
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.